Well, a while ago I read something about the Barista economy, and it was a little article, and I can't remember it exactly, but I think it was basically trying to say that today's economy has a lot of jobs for baristas, who are basically people who make coffee, and waiters and other people in the hospitality industry. You know, and these were the new jobs that are out there, and basically, I can't exactly remember, but I think it was insinuating that this is all the new jobs that are out there, and that's the jobs that we're going to move into if we find ourselves unemployed. And it reminded me very much of a documentary I saw about Hong Kong. So I'm going to talk about that. Now, Hong Kong, for those of you who don't know much about it, it's only about 15 square kilometres in size. Now, there are a few other smaller islands. One of them's got a big statue of Buddha, and a lot of that's national park. But essentially speaking, Hong Kong is a city-state, about 15 square kilometres in size, and it's rose up, it sort of got on its feet with cheap manufactured products. Now, basically what happened is a bunch of manufacturers, you know, blokes who wanted to start factories, went to the government of Hong Kong and said, we want you to build cheap housing, cheap public housing. So they went and built all these multi-storey apartment buildings, which are still there today, you know, with nice dirt cheap rent, that would allow them to basically be able to get cheap labour in order to be able to make cheap manufactured goods. And because these buildings were, you know, public housing, and the rent was so low, that meant that these factory workers didn't need to be paid a great massive wage, because they already knew that they were getting super cheap rent. And it worked out fine, and the country got going off of that, and a lot of factories in very tight spots, and made a lot of cheap manufactured goods, and that got the country on its feet. But the dynamics of the country changed over time, and basically it started to become, you know, there was a lot of exporters, and it had basically become the gateway to mainland China, and more so just the access to the goods provided by mainland China. And as a result, it sort of got, well, it turned into a lot of office space. And basically, there were so many exporters working in offices there, organising stuff coming out of mainland China, that the rent started to go through the roof. And it was no longer practical to have a factory in Hong Kong itself. It was only really worthwhile. I mean, you just couldn't compete. You simply could not compete with factories in mainland China, because a lot of the people who used to own factories in Hong Kong had realised that A, the workers work cheaper in mainland China, because, you know, not every worker could live in the public housing, because there was only a certain amount of the public housing, and so, you know, some couldn't get houses in the public housing. Furthermore, there were so many exporters there that it was pushing the price of rent through the roof, because they wanted to get these factories and turn them into offices, because office space could be rented at a higher price. It was as simple as that. And it was, you know, a lot of these people who did have factories in Hong Kong itself had now gone to mainland China to start factories, and there were so many of them that had done that, and so many, basically, people just filling out import and export paperwork, and organising orders from Western countries, that it just, you know, you couldn't afford to have a factory there because the rent would just kill you comparative to having one in, you know, on mainland China. So basically, one by one, these factories all closed. And it started to become a bit of a problem, because a lot of the workers who had been in public housing didn't have jobs anymore. And the union, one of the large union reps, you know, sort of met with the government and a lot of the people there and sort of said, well, look, you know, people are hurting here. The jobs are just running out. We want some sort of welfare. And all the businessmen and all that, no, we don't want to pay you welfare. You know, you'll be getting a free lunch. We don't want to hand out freebies to you. You'll just be, you know, sitting on your butt getting this money for nothing, blah, blah, blah. And they said, well, your factories have all closed. You moved them all to Flame in mainland China. What the hell are we supposed to do for a job? And the answer was, oh, it's easy. You just get a job in the service industry. There's plenty of jobs in the service industry. And let's stop for a moment and look at the service industry. Now, what have you got in the service industry in Hong Kong? Well, of course, as many micronations do, you've got banking. So you've got banking, you've got, of course, connected with that, accountants, you've got lawyers, and you've got doctors and surgeons, and you've also got teachers for the children and whatnot. And, you know, you've got engineers as well, I suppose, who may design this stuff. But a lot of the stuff, you know, was already sort of quite possibly designed, you know, by Chinese factories and then just rebadged or, you know, already being manufactured in mainland China anyway. So I don't know how many engineers there would have been. But there were engineers involved in the construction industry. You know, any smaller buildings were knocked down to build larger multi-storey ones. And of course the construction industry itself would have been able to have semi-skilled workers, you know, welders, people running cranes, and, you know, other trades, concreting and stuff like that. And, you know, that would have been able to take some unskilled labour. But then the unskilled labour in the factories, the main jobs they would fall into would be kitchen hands in restaurants, you know, people like baristas and things like that, waiters, garbage men, and cleaners who clean offices, clean restaurants, clean hotels, clean conference centres, you know, maybe window cleaners as well. But essentially speaking, when you start to nut it all out here, you got masses of factory workers who have all been laid off as each factory is closed and then been ripped down or basically probably just converted into office space. And at the end of the day, you've got a whole stack of unskilled factory workers who are supposed to fall into garbage men, waiters, kitchen hands, people in retail and shops, and cleaners. And quite simply, when push come to shove, as this documentary made in 96 or around there, maybe 97, I think it was late 96 it was made in. As the documentary showed, there just wasn't enough work for these former factory workers in the service industry. And there were all these guys there who basically were just spending most of their day sitting around because they literally only got about 5 hours work a week, and I mean they were just living hand to mouth. They were barely existing. But there was no welfare for them, and they just had to, scramble around and get what little work they could, which was almost nothing. And I know a lot of micronations, have done well becoming tax havens, and, setting up banking as a result of being tax havens, and, company registration and stuff like that. Registering company names and setting up company structures and whatnot. And some of these micronations prior to that, a lot of these micronations were just subsistence fishermen, and stuff like that, where they've done very little except maybe export a bit of fish. The other one was banana republics. That's a phrase over here. Some of the republics down in South America that are very small, they just exported bananas as their main industry. But some of these joints have come from nothing and clung on to being tax havens. But regardless of what the micronations are doing, I just wanted to bring up more so this shift that Hong Kong experienced from being a manufacturing nation to a nation where the unskilled workers now only had service jobs, particularly in hospitality, as their jobs to do, or cleaners. And, quite simply, when they moved from this manufacturing economy to this so-called barista economy, i.e. the service economy, regardless of the fact of how many conference centres there were, how many offices there were owned by exporters, how many, high-class shops, because they sell a lot of really high-end stuff. In Hong Kong, it's only the best of the best, for the actual rich of Hong Kong. You won't see them buying the tacky stuff that they're actually sending in shipping containers to the West. They only want the real high-class stuff imported from Europe and stuff like that. But when it was all said and done, there just was not enough jobs, even with all these multi-storey offices that needed to be cleaned. There still was not enough jobs when the country of Hong Kong transferred from a manufacturing country to a services industry only country. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there, and if you ever have any more newspaper opinions, politicians, industry smart asses, or any other arrogant, snobs, spin doctors, and that trying to tell you that, oh no, everything's going to be fine, because all you got to do is move from your old manufacturing jobs that you used to have into the barista economy, and that's the new economy, and there's plenty of jobs in the service industry. Don't believe these spin doctors, because it's crap. And Hong Kong's past shows that it is crap. They are proof that the service industry will not make up for all the manufacturing jobs that used to be in a country that was based on manufacturing.